Hey, this is Kendall Lyden with My Home Option, and today we're going to be talking all about selling your home subject to. Now, subject to is basically where you as the home seller are selling your home to a buyer subject to the current loan terms, conditions, the amount owed, and all that kind of good stuff. It's not official with the lender. It's very popular among real estate investors and traditional buyers, especially as interest rates go up. And so if you're thinking about selling your home subject to, this is a video to explain to you just that, as we talk about all things in how to sell your home subject to. So first off, let's talk about what is subject to. Now, subject to is, like I said kind of in the intro, this is where the buyer is going to take over. They are going to take over the loan subject to the current terms and conditions. Now, it is important to note though that the loan still stays in your name as the home seller. And so you need to realize that in the bank side, you're still responsible for making sure that those payments get in. So as long as you sell it to a buyer who's extremely responsible and makes all those payments on time, it's no big deal. But you know, if things start coming up, they stop making payments, it can put you in a weird spot, because even though the house isn't yours because you've deeded it over to the new homeowner, the buyer, the mortgage deed is still in your name. The note is still in your name. So in the lender's eyes, you're still on the hook for that amount, and put you in a kind of a strange spot. So keep that in mind. Also, because on a subject to, there's no real official conversation done with the lender, this can put you in a weird spot where, you know, the lender can enact something called the due on clause, which essentially means that the full remaining balance on the note is due. But we're not going to talk too much about that right now. We're going to get into it just a little bit later in the video, but you need to watch out for that, because, you know, that can be extremely a very hard hurdle to overcome if that comes due. And then, like I said, if the buyer stops paying, the note's still in your name, foreclosure happens on you, tarnishes your credit score, tarnishes your name, and it's just not a great position to be in. Now, I'll say before we get any further into the video, I'm not a huge fan of subject to. It's great if you're a buyer, but I just feel like it doesn't give a lot of protection to homeowners, but we still want to kind of give a lot of information around it, just to make sure if you do decide you're dead set on, hey, I want to do this process, just give you some information to hopefully, you know, it's done the best way possible for you and your situation. So the advantages for the buyer, there's tons of them, but let's go over briefly a couple of those. You know, you're taking advantage of lower interest rates typically, and you're taking advantage of very low transaction costs all the way through, and you don't have to qualify, but you know, you as the home seller need to be extremely careful who you're selling your home to, because if it's somebody that can't get a traditional loan, they're not able to qualify there, and they're coming, you know, to you to buy it owner finance, and they're not reputable enough to qualify with the lender. Do you really want your name on the hook for that kind of buyer if something goes sideways? You see what I'm saying? If the lender doesn't trust them in the first place, should you? Just something for you to think about. You just need to keep that in the back of your mind as you're going through this process. Now, there are advantages to both parties, and that one of the main ones is that the closing costs all the way around are usually a lot lower. If you can have no agents possibly, if you can get rid of those loan origination costs and all that kind of stuff, you know, you might be able to absorb those profits extra as the home seller. So if you're in a buyer's market, this typically is going to let you sell, you know, at maybe a little bit above asking, and you're going to have a ton of negotiation power because of this amazing bargaining chip that you have. And then if you're in a seller's market, you're going to be able to sell probably well over asking because of, again, this amazing bargaining chip that you have on your side. But while this is a great tool, a great bargaining chip, you need to be very careful how and when you use it, because it really can come back to bite you in the butt if you don't do it right. Now let's talk about, let's transition here and talk about three different types of subject to. Now there's a lot of different variations. Investors can get very creative. We're going to kind of talk about three broad categories that most of these are going to be able to fall into. Number one, subject to with cash to value. So this would be a situation where, again, on the subject to, you're selling the note subject to the buyer, where they're just taking the loan over at the amount that's still owed with the current terms and conditions. But you've agreed to an amount, they're paying an amount over and above what you still owe on the property, and that amount is going to be paid out in cash. So let's give an example of that. If you sell $150,000 at 4%, and you've agreed to a purchase price of $200,000, you're going to sell the house subject to. You're going to give the house subject to the current loan terms and conditions over to the buyer at that $150,000. 4% mark, and you're going to get that cash difference between the $150,000 that you owe and that $200,000 purchase price. You're going to get that in cash, which is $50,000. So on top of giving it over subject to, you're going to get $50,000 cash immediately. Now, let's say that your buyer doesn't have $50,000 cash, but they're willing to agree to that $200,000 purchase price. What do? Well, here's another option. You can do a subject to with owner financing. This is kind of our second category of what can happen in a subject to. So this is where the buyer is, taking over the loan subject to those current terms and conditions. But a part of that amount of that difference, instead of paying cash, is going to be owner finance. Now, we always recommend a deposit, a down payment, portion that's still cash, just to have some skin in the game. But you can do whatever you want. Let's give you a typical example of what this might look like. So if you still owe $150,000 at 4%, purchase price is $200,000, just like the previous example. You would give subject to that, you'd sell it subject to at that $150,000 4% mark, but then let's look at the other $50,000 balance. This is where things really change. So, like I said, we would really recommend that you do a down payment, a deposit for that $200,000 purchase price. So let's say that you get 10%. You have $20,000 cash, and then $30,000 you're going to owner finance. And so then you would decide you'd have an entirely different, where you would come up with your own rate and terms and payout and balloon, if there's a balloon or any of that kind of stuff. And all that would be separate from that original subject to. So there's the one note that they have that they're taking over for you, subject to, and they're gonna have another note directly to you as you owner finance the rest of that equity, and then they've also given you a cash portion on top of that because you're a smart homeowner and you required a down payment. Then our third kind of option here, and this is if you're gonna go down this road, this is my favorite. This is a wraparound. Now, some people call it wraparound subject to. I like to just call it a wraparound. But this is basically where you sell or finance an entirely new and separate note from the original note to the buyer, and you basically become a complete middleman. Now, this is typically going to be same as the other ones, over and above the loan price, loan amount, the current loan amount owed, and over and above the current interest rate. So in this example, we'll go back to the same thing. You owe $150,000 at 4%. Purchase price is $200,000, but you've also agreed to a new term because it's separate. The purchase price can be $200,000. You're creating a new note. So let's say you said $200,000 and 6% interest. This is where I really like this one. So on the wraparound, your buyer is now paying you $200,000 at 6%. They're giving you a 10% down payment of $20,000. So they gave you that $20,000 cash. They're paying you $180,000 at 6%. That's owner finance. So basically what that breakdown looks like for you is per month, you made $20,000 cash, and then as far as your month-to-month cash flow, you're making 6% on that $30,000 difference between $180,000 and $150,000, and then you're making 2% interest every month on the remaining $150,000 amount. So you're getting a payment over to you, and then you're making a payment over to the lender. You become a lot like a landlord at that point, except for you don't have to deal with any repairs or anything like that. Kind of need the bad stuff of being a landlord. I like this too because it gives you some room that you can stack some money back, that if the home buyer stops making payments for 90 days, you go into that foreclosure with them, you have money set aside that you can still be making payments to your bank, so that house doesn't go into foreclosure. You can get the foreclosure sold on this side, then you can resell the house, get a new down payment, and then get that cash flow rolling and going again. So that's extremely advantageous. So out of those three routes, if you were going to choose one, I don't like this a lot. Don't like SubjectTo, but that's the one I would pick. Now, let's very quickly, as we're wrapping up the video here, talk about loan assumption versus SubjectTo, and then we'll close this thing out. So loan assumption is where you have the bank's permission to do the transaction, and the buyer is actually going to take over all the terms and conditions just like SubjectTo, except for the note goes into their name. So if they foreclose, if anything goes wrong down the line, it's on them, not on you. I like that a lot better because I think it puts you as the home seller in a lot better position, but that's just my take on it. And then SubjectTo, again, is where the lender does not have an idea about what's going on. You really don't want them to, because they can enact that due on clause. And so then you have no permission though, and it's kind of like the Wild West, and you're just trying to make sure that everything goes right. Hopefully nothing goes wrong. Now, let's talk about that due on clause. This is basically a clause that can be called once there's a transfer done of the deed. They can call the entire amount of the loan due immediately. And if the current, let's say that the buyer, because you transferred the deed, the title, into a new homeowner's name, if they can't pay that amount in full, the house is going to foreclose. But because it's SubjectTo and the loan is still in your name, even though the house isn't in your name, that's on you at the end of the day. It hits your credit, it hits your name, and so that's a really bad situation. It puts you between a rock and a hard place, because you also don't want to pay off that note because they're SubjectTo, so like you're paying it off for them, and that's also a huge sum of money that you might not be able to afford. So that's really why I like the wraparound, because even in a wraparound, if you could find a way to pay off that first note, you're still getting paid on that second note, and I just think there's a lot more protection there. Also, homeowners insurance is really weird on these. I just want to make that note, because whenever you have a loan with a lender, they require you to have a certain level of homeowners insurance. Well, if the loan is still in your name but the deed's in somebody else's name, there's a new homeowner, the lender still expects you to be on the homeowner's insurance policy for that home, even though you're not the homeowner. So that can get really weird. I'm not going to dive into all the ways that you can make that right. I don't really love this process, but I'm sure other people out there have explained it well. If you're really curious, you can drop something down in the comments. I can probably push you towards some different avenues and information sources, but I don't want to be on the line for giving you information that causes you to go into a due on clause, and this gets really, really tricky and hairy. Like I said, again, I really don't recommend this process, but I wanted to kind of give you some information on it to help you, just in case you were set to do it. This is how I would recommend doing it, with that wraparound, and then making sure that you have that homeowner's insurance ironed out, just so the bank never has to know that there's been a transfer of ownership. So in closing, there's fewer costs, this is faster, maybe more profitable for you as a home seller, but it could get really hard to deal with if the buyer stops paying, if the lender calls their due on clause, and you having to figure out how do you get that homeowner's insurance. So the key to this transaction is really having a good buyer who can help you navigate this situation and won't just bail on you if the going gets rough. So if the going gets rough, you need the rough to stay in there and keep making those payments. So we don't really highly recommend making this option. Again, I just want to say that one more time, but we can connect you with an investor who can kind of give you some of the different options. If that's one of the options that they do facilitate, they could give you that option. But we at My Home Option don't really dive into that specific option too much, because it's just a very risky option, but we can definitely point you to some investors who do that and can walk you through what that process would look like. But as always, make sure that you set up your free one-on-one strategy session call at myhomeoption.com. I can almost guarantee you we can help you find a better solution than a SubjectTo for you in your current situation, to help you get everything figured out and sold as best as possible. Make sure you follow us on Facebook for more tips, tricks, and market updates, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all your questions answered. And if you can't find the video that you're looking for, make sure you drop a question in the comments below and we'll make a video on it. So thank you so much for stopping by, for watching this video, and we will see you next time.